This is the next question. Now, assuming philosophical motions tend to be difficult for people who are very utilitarian, some assistance on how to crack down on this genre of motion would be nice. Also, not only with regards to motions, but with trends of debate style. Apparently, debate was very different a few years ago, where principal arguments were mandatory. While I don't know why you think we know what happened with debates a few years ago. We've just gone to debating.
We're young and dynamic and cool, really cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And we care a lot about whether people think we're cool. So apparently debates have changed a long time ago or something, and logical analysis seem to be losing debates compared to those who sell to arguments by appealing to the heart. Can't fight what the heart wants. Regardless of which direction is correct, addressing these issues seem to be something that would help greatly. Okay, so let's split this down into a few components. Let's talk about the balance between philosophical motions and this utilitarian thing as one. And then maybe whether this has been a shift from more philosophical to utilitarian, and whether there seems to be this idea that this philosophical, what's not logical is stuff of the heart, right? And logical here may be utilitarian as in logical, because philosophy is not logical.
It's not about logic.
Not about logic.
I feel like we're making fun of people who have asked us questions when we really want to encourage you to ask questions. But if you do ask questions that we can make fun of, we will also do that because that's who we are.
We like having fun.
We do, and we've had a few beers. So
yes.
If we haven't mentioned that before. So let's start with this idea that there are some people who are very utilitarian and some people who are very of the heart. And I'd say, firstly, that's the wrong way of thinking about the division. So for those who aren't clear about this, utilitarian is one of the two major, certainly Western schools of ethics. So utilitarianism says that when you're trying to decide what's right or wrong, the simplest way you can decide between two options or multiple options is to look for the option which most maximizes happiness or positive outcomes. And that decision is by definition the right decision to do, and an action which doesn't maximize that happiness or that positive outcome is not the ethical and right thing to do. There are other schools of thought, sometimes called Kantianism or deontologicalism, or they have lots of fancy names. But the Kantian school is to say, no, you can't do a kind of mathematical equation to figure out what's right or wrong. What's right or wrong is based on a bunch of fundamental core, what Kant called categorical imperatives, things which must be the case. So, for example, we should never kill an innocent person. It doesn't matter whether there is some way in which killing that innocent person means that other people are better off. An innocent person should never have their life abridged for any reason. That the protection of life is absolutely paramount. Equally, we should never torture people, even people who aren't innocent, even people who have done bad things, because to torture someone is a fundamental violation of their human rights and what it means to be a person, and so we should never do that. No price is worth the price of breaching those fundamental rights. And you can see how that's a divide, right? Because utilitarians would say, well, if that innocent person nevertheless is sick with a disease, and if I don't kill them, they're going to spread this disease to all these other people in the community, then so killing them is going to save all these other people from getting sick. That's clearly the right thing to do to a utilitarian, but to a Kantian, that's definitely unacceptable, and you have to find some other solution to the problem. But even though it's pretty clear that there is a utilitarian answer to some questions and a kind of Kantian answer to some questions, very, very few people in the world are always one or the other, always utilitarian or always Kantian. I think we all have things where we believe we should just do the kind of the right space thing to do. There are things where the outcome is less important than the action itself. Yep. And so lots of people, for example, who are opposed to the death penalty would say it doesn't matter whether it's more expensive to keep people in prison than it is to execute them, or it doesn't matter that there's a possibility that if you lock them up they might escape, or they might be released one day and they might commit another crime. It's just fundamentally wrong to kill someone who is under the state's control, and that's just that's a line we shouldn't cross. But there are very few people who are strictly one school or another. So even our friend here who says that he's very utilitarian, I'm sure if someone put a gun to his head and said, you have to choose between me killing your mother, or me killing two random strangers that you've never met and you're never going to meet and you're never going to know about, the experience that they have of me killing them. It's very hard under those circumstances to say, no, you should kill my mother because I want to protect these two other, random people because I don't know anything about them. I don't have an emotional connection to them.
Yep.
I don't value their life to the same extent that I value the life of this person who's very important to me. So, but at the same time, that person might still be very utilitarian about other decisions about, how to spend money or how to allocate resources or how to make other important life decisions. So, first point is nobody's just utilitarian or just Kantian. We're all a little bit of both depending on the circumstances. And in a debate, you have to show how, in this particular context, one philosophical view is the right way to make that type of choice, rather than necessarily saying, this is the philosophical school in which we should make all difficult choices.
Yep. And most debates are both, too. I think really good debates are debates that have a philosophical perspective to that debate, as well as a utilitarian or practical perspective to that debate. I think part of this confusion arises from what you think are important, an important basis to make a decision, right? So if I'm going to legalize something, I'm going to legalize marijuana, something, for example, then I'm going to say, the practical implications of doing these things are this, and this is where we make more money, and this is how we reduce harm, and all these, a litany of practical, hence utilitarian, decision-making criteria. But there's also really important philosophical issues, whether someone should, regardless of whether the state makes more money or harm is reduced or increased, whether you just have the right to do those things. And I think a really good debate is a debate that includes both of these perspectives. And a really good motion are the motions that give space for both of these perspectives. Although sometimes a motion may specifically exclude one of these perspectives because it wants you to focus wholly on the other, but almost all of them include both, right? So that's the first outcome of this, that don't look at these things as only one or the other. There's always there's always both. So even if you think you're predominantly utilitarian, you have made some philosophical arguments before. But I guess the question that you're asking is what happens when that utilitarian aspect is specifically excluded from this debate, right? So there is assuming this is possible, this house would exclude all utilitarian arguments from this debate and do it in a completely philosophical aspect, and the motion is such. Or this is wholly a debate of the mind. What happens in that particular context? And to that I'd say, first of all, it's really difficult to do this without any context whatsoever. But the most interesting debates for me are ones where you can completely detach whatever happens. It's like an if, right? So if you could, would you? Right? So if you could be a horse, or if you could be like a can of beer, which one would you rather be? Right? You could be a horse, you'd be free, you could run around.
You'd be at no risk in this room.
No risk I don't know. No risk in this room, of being consumed.
Yeah.
But if you're a can of beer, you could be consumed, but you give enjoyment to people. You could travel the world far more freely than you could as a horse. You would be a representation of an ancient culture. That's what you'd be as a can of beer.
Yeah.
Which one would you rather choose? Now, why would you choose? So if I was, it's silly, but follow me. So if I was going to debate these things, I need to provide a standard or a framework to compare these two things. Just a quick random discussion here. We've done a couple of things. Tim said, you're not going to be any harm in this room. So which one of these two things would be less harmful to you? And he provided a context of in this room. So in this room, you're probably much better off being a horse than a can of beer. In the world today, which one would you rather be? You're better off being one or the other. Or in terms of what brings the most happiness, the most number of people, which one would you rather be? In terms of what's most sustainable, which I know. But you provide a standard for these two things, and then you compare and you discuss them, right? So the philosophical motions aren't grounded in the standards that other people have created, right? They're not saying in order to solve human poverty or provide more food for the world, they've given you a standard, which one of these solutions work out better. They give you a kind of framework, and then you need to decide which standards are more applicable, and how would you decide these two things. And that makes it a little bit more challenging, but that's actually something that you are already doing and do all the time.
If you want to practice this, there's an old topic from, way back long before, Logan and I were just starting out in debating, that was quite common, which was a topic that this house would rather plant cabbages than roses. And the debate really about cabbages versus roses is about a sort of utilitarian approach. Cabbages are not very glamorous or even especially delicious, but they're nutritious and they'll keep you alive if you have nothing else. But they won't do much to kind of nourish your soul, I guess, to be poetic about it. Or you can plant roses, and roses obviously will do nothing to improve your hunger or your physical well-being. But they're very beautiful, and they will, they'll give you other kinds of satisfaction and pleasure than just what food can provide. And the trick to that debate is exactly what Logan said at the start, that any team that tries to say, we're the cabbage team, so we think the only thing that matters is practicality, and so we'll show you why it's always better to not starve to death, which is a truism. Or the other side says, no, we're the roses side, and we're saying that there's no point being alive if you don't have any sort of spiritual enjoyment, if you haven't got anything other than just your basic survival needs, then that's also probably a truism as well. But either way, that's a very boring debate, and what matters is that for both teams to be able to make the obvious argument, which is why practical things matter, or why impractical things matter as well, but to also cross over and deal with the kind of position that their opponents take. So why the pro roses side has to say why yes, of course it's important that we meet our basic needs, but if you just pursued that approach all the time, we would never have anything of any cultural or kind of intellectual value, because there's plenty of starving people in the world. There's plenty of people who need more, basic needs. And if we diverted all of our resources to that, we'd have no arts, we'd have no culture, we'd have no sport, we'd have no recreation, because those things could never be prioritized ahead of the needs of people's basic, needs for food and shelter. And that would be a pretty horrible world, collectively for us all to live in. It'd be a pretty stark world. And vice versa, the cabbage people have to say, yes, we understand it's important that people have more to their life than just their basic survival, but we're going to show you why, to go back to Logan's point, in this context, at this point in time, given these current situations, these current conditions, why it's important now that we give more emphasis to those basic things than we give to those, more discretionary things. And that's a real debate, and that's a very sophisticated debate. So if you want to practice writing cases for both the pro-cabbage team and the pro-rose team, hopefully you'll be able to see how, by trying to make the obvious arguments and the kind of crossover arguments, that you can bridge that divide of emotion and utilitarianism.
We've covered a bit of ground here, although I'm not sure we've actually answered the question that you specifically want to answer.
So ask us again.
Yeah, so answer us again. But in the interest of having good structure, I'm going to say we've talked a little bit about how to do philosophy versus philosophy rounds. So where you don't really have a utilitarian context, you need to apply one and create standards. And as long as you can compare two things in a conceptual way, that's a debate. And don't be afraid of that. And Tim's also just talked about how you can do something philosophical or perceptually soft versus something more utility based, right? Like cabbages versus roses. I think it was potatoes versus roses.
Is that right?
What I heard, yeah.
Fascinating.
My teachers, maybe part Irish. And in that sense, how do you flip that debate around and add more value to life by showing how these perceivably soft things have more value? Okay, but if that doesn't completely answer what you want, think about it a bit more, maybe it will. And if it still doesn't, ask the question again, and if we have a context, that maybe we can be more specific in our response.